Welcome back to Outside Views, and bro, we need to talk. And today we need to talk about a concept so absurd, so perfectly symbolic of a country utterly lost in its own economic confusion, that it almost beggars belief. And the topic? The British government's new, desperate and frankly insulting plan to kickstart the economy. Britain get wasted for the upswing. And yes, you heard me right. The big new idea, the grand strategic vision to save the sputtering UK economy, is to tell local pubs to stay open later, maybe until midnight, maybe even later. That's something we here in Germany have anyway, so that's something I wouldn't criticize in the first place, and it was quite unusual to me when I was living in the UK that they closed so early. But the exclusive report that dropped the other night suggested the government is trying to make it easier for pubs and bars to extend their operating hours. And they are essentially proposing a shift from suffocating bureaucracy to a kind of bureaucracy. They want a fifth criterion added to the licensing process, at least for England and Wales. Currently, local authorities have to weigh public safety, crime prevention, child protection, and the prevention of public nuisance, the sensible stuff. But the new, brilliant, absolutely crucial fifth aspect? A business should be allowed to pour more pints for longer if it serves the upswing, so if it boosts the economy. And this is not a policy, this is a punchline. It's a desperate flailing from a government that 15 months after taking over a quite dilapidated kingdom, as the report calls it, has failed to deliver on its primary promise of economic revival. Prime Minister Keir Starmer might wax lyrical about pubs and bars being the pulsing heart of our communities, but what good is a heart that's being financially squeezed until it stops beating? Because despite the sweet-sounding rhetoric, the reality for the hospitality industry is brutal. The sector has been hammered by necessary but poorly managed increases to the minimum wage and employer contributions. Add to that the crushing weight of high alcohol taxes and skyrocketing energy prices, and you have a recipe for disaster. And the numbers are a tragedy. In the 1960s, the UK boasted 75,000 pubs, but last year that number was fewer than 45,000. On average, a pub is closing its doors for good every single day. And the government's response to this fundamental structural crisis? Just drink more, stay out later, spend more money you don't have so Treasury can get a few extra shillings in VAT. It's a pathetic, superficial gesture that distracts from the real deep-seated economic woes that are strangling small businesses across the entire country. The history of the UK's licensing laws is darkly ironic, and it highlights just how little has changed in terms of state paternalism and control. The infamous British curfew, the dreaded 11 o'clock closing time, was originally introduced in 1915 during the First World War. And why? To ensure that workers in the munitions factories actually showed up sober for their morning shift. The then War Minister Lloyd George famously declared, "We are fighting three enemies, Germany, Austria and alcohol. And so far as I can see, the greatest of these three deadly foes is alcohol." That's the history they are trying to undo with this supposed upswing policy. But here's the grim truth. That enemy has not been defeated. In fact, the problem is getting worse, not better. In 2023, the UK saw over 10,000 reported deaths directly attributable to drinking, and that's a horrific new record. And this is the backdrop against which the government proposes its grand new economic strategy. Encourage more drinking later at night under the guise of national recovery. The critics of this new freedom are right to fear an inevitable increase in alcohol-related deaths, crimes, and public disturbances. It's an irresponsible gamble with public health and safety, trading genuine policy solutions for the small, temporary sugar rush of late-night alcohol sales. Of course, I've heard the counter argument that longer hours don't necessarily mean more unhealthiness. It just means people can take their time instead of rushing to quaff it all down before the bell tolls. And yes, here in Germany, of course, I have my experiences with the later hours. But you cannot always compare two countries. And let's be brutally honest. This is an economic argument and not a public health one. The government is not focused on the nuanced sociological impact of changing drinking culture. They are focused on the cash register. They are hoping for a magic bullet, a cheap trick to create the appearance of economic activity without having to tackle the genuinely hard and complex problems. Because the real issues are structural. The long-term impact of trade barriers on exports, the crippling effects of inflation, the failure to attract and retain workers due to immigration policy shifts, and the simple lack of a compelling industrial strategy for the 21st century. Where is the plan for green investment, for reskilling the workforce, for fixing the broken public services that are a drag on productivity? Instead of a serious plan for manufacturing, innovation or trade, well, you get more beer. It's a policy that is symbolic of a fundamental and almost childish misunderstanding of how a modern economy actually grows. You don't build a sustainable, prosperous, world-leading economy on the back of extending pub hours. You build it on trade, on investment, on education, and on a coherent vision for the country's place in the world. And this get wasted for the upswing idea is a microcosm of a larger systemic failure of imagination and courage. It shows that those in charge are willing to use frivolous, distractionary, and potentially harmful social policy to mask their inability to execute a successful economic one. It's an insult to the struggling small business owners, the pub landlords who are closing their doors every day, who need tax relief, energy price caps, and trade facilitation, not just permission to stay open another hour so a few more people can stumble home drunker. It's a policy that treats the public not as citizens whose health and safety must be protected, but as consumers whose only duty is to spend money, even if it kills them. A successful society does not need to compromise public order and health for the sake of its GDP. The true upswing comes from stable, well-paid employment, competitive exports, and confident investment. And closer alignment with the EU, to be honest. And this latest suggestion is merely a desperate attempt to boost the most fragile, most easily taxed sector of the service economy and call that a strategy. It is a sad telling commentary on the current state of British politics and economic confidence. It's time to stop the silly gimmicks and start building a real economy, an economy that doesn't rely on getting people drunker later at night to keep the lights on. This is not an upswing, it's a cheap, temporary high that will lead to an even worse hangover. So thanks for joining me once again on Outside Views, and I'm really looking forward to hear your thoughts on this one, what you think of this ridiculous proposal. Seriously, I almost don't know what to say anymore. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.